So what if I told you that being a fundamentally, quote unquote, good person,
Right.
like volunteering your time, being endlessly patient with your family, giving to charity, never telling a lie, what if all of that might actually be the exact thing stopping you from reaching ultimate spiritual transformation?
I mean, it sounds completely counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
Because it just flies in the face of literally everything we're taught from, well, from the moment we can walk, honestly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, we are so conditioned to think of personal growth and, well, especially spirituality as this ladder.
The moral ladder.
Right. You're born, and maybe you're a little selfish as a kid,
As kids are.
as they are. You're a little rough around the edges, and your whole life is supposed to be this slow, sometimes painful climb up these rungs of morality.
Yeah, leaving the bad stuff at the bottom.
Exactly. You leave the bad behaviors behind,
Mm-hmm.
and you just strive for the good behaviors at the top. And the top of that ladder is just becoming a good person.
It's a very clean trajectory.
It is. It's comforting.
Ah.
We love having a metric for our progress,
Yeah.
Like you do good things, therefore you become a good person. Simple.
And it forms the bedrock of our entire civic philosophy,
Yeah.
our justice systems, and frankly, most mainstream religious frameworks, too.
Yeah.
I mean, behavior modification is just the currency of human civilization.
Totally.
We reward the good, we punish the bad, and we just kind of assume that whatever higher power might exist out there, well, it operates on the exact same accounting system.
Right. But today, we are walking into a framework that takes that ladder and just completely shatters it.
Yeah, just into a million pieces.
Literally.
Yeah.
We are diving into a really specific, highly structured theological landscape where your goodness is actually not the goal at
Yeah.
all. In fact, according to the architecture we're exploring today, your natural human goodness might be just as much of a roadblock as your darkest flaws.
Which is a genuinely terrifying thought.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially for anyone who has spent their entire life just, trying to be good. Because we're looking at a blueprint here that bypasses moral improvement entirely.
Right.
It's not trying to take a broken human and fix them into a highly moral human. It's aiming for a radical, fundamental change in species.
Yeah. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're taking you on a journey through some really dense, incredibly provocative source material.
Very dense.
Yeah, our mission is to sort of map out this journey from what the material calls a natural man to something it calls a God man.
Which is a wild term.
It really is. And we're pulling from excerpts of a structured study text. It's labeled Week 1-Day 1, and that draws its foundation from these massive theological commentaries, specifically one called The Conclusion of the New Testament
Right.
and a volume called The Vital Groups.
Yeah.
But I want to set a very clear ground rule for you listening right now. We're approaching this strictly as explorers.
Yes.
We aren't here to, endorse this theology or debate its validity or debunk it. That's not the point.
We're just looking at the map.
Exactly. We are walking into this highly unique, self-contained, intellectual and spiritual ecosystem just to understand its internal logic.
Mm-hmm.
And the core of that logic is this astonishing claim that humanity is meant to undergo a complete ontological shift.
And let me just jump in on that word real quick.
Go for it.
Ontological. Because we are talking about the actual literal essence of being here, the state of existence. This framework, it isn't a self-help program offering tips for a better morning routine
Right.
or a more peaceful mindset. The terminology here, this God-man idea, is audacious. It implies a hybrid state.
Yeah.
But to even begin to understand how someone arrives at that crazy destination, we really have to look at the starting line.
We do.
We have to figure out exactly who is actually being invited into this process.
Which brings us to this really fascinating linguistic mystery in the early texts of the New Testament.
Oh, I love this part.
It's so interesting because the material we're looking at points out a very sharp, almost jarring shift in vocabulary. In the early books, so the Gospels where Jesus is walking around, and the book of Acts, which covers the immediate aftermath.
Right, the early days.
Yeah, the followers are constantly, obsessively referred to as disciples.
Mm-hmm.
That word is just everywhere.
Everywhere.
But then you turn the page to the epistles, the letters written by Paul and Peter and John to those early churches, and the word completely vanishes.
Just gone.
It just drops out of their vocabulary entirely.
And a sudden linguistic disappearance like that, especially in foundational, highly scrutinized texts, it's never just a stylistic choice.
Oh.
It's a massive structural indicator because the term disciple, In that first century context, it carried a really heavy specific weight.
Right.
It wasn't a synonym for like fan or even believer. It denoted this active, rigorous, proximate relationship to a master teacher.
Mm-hmm.
It was a state of being in the forge, so to speak.
And the material actually gives us a physical, geographic visualization of what this means, right? It points to a really famous moment. The Sermon on the Mount in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5.
Yeah, the setup there is key.
It is. The scene is set up with a very deliberate spatial divide. You have Jesus going up onto the mountain, and there's this massive crowd. But the text makes a distinction. The crowds are the outer circle.
Right.
They're at the bottom, or maybe just mingling on the edges. But then it says, his disciples came to him.
They close the gap.
Exactly. They close the distance. They form this inner circle.
And that spatial metaphor is crucial for understanding the psychology of this whole framework. I mean, think about the nature of a crowd.
Yeah.
A crowd offers anonymity. You can just hide in a crowd. The general populace in the outer circle, they're there for a variety of reasons. Maybe they heard about miracles. Maybe they want free food. Maybe they're just curious about the spectacle of it all. They're spectators.
Right.
To move from that outer circle to the inner circle requires a deliberate, voluntary loss of that anonymity.
It really feels a lot like the difference between buying a nosebleed ticket to a massive stadium concert.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. Versus getting called backstage into the rehearsal room.
Yeah.
Like if you're in the stadium crowd, you're a fan, you love the music, you're singing along, maybe you bought the overpriced t-shirt.
Yeah, you're technically participating in the event.
Exactly. But if you walk through those security doors and into the rehearsal room with the band, the expectation completely changes.
Totally changes.
You aren't there to clap anymore. You're there because they're going to hand you a guitar, and you're expected to learn how to play it exactly like they do. It's a terrifying shift in responsibility.
And that backstage environment is a perfect equivalent to the concept of the incubator.
The incubator.
Yeah. The gospel period, according to this analysis, serves as a necessary temporary incubator. And that explains the vanishing of the word disciple in those later letters.
Oh, right, because they aren't in the incubator forever.
Exactly. A disciple is someone actively in the incubator. It's a crucible phase of intense proximate training. You just can't stay in an incubator your entire life. Eventually, you have to be born out of it.
So the idea is that the people receiving those later letters, the epistles, they had already survived the backstage training.
That's the implication, yeah.
Or at least they were now operated under a new post-incubator identity.
Yes, exactly. The epistles are written to those who have theoretically passed through those fiery mechanics of discipleship, or they're part of a community built on the other side of that process. What is equally fascinating is how this material traces the evolution of who is actually allowed into that backstage room.
Right. Because initially, on that mountain in Matthew 5, the inner circle is incredibly homogeneous. It's exclusively Jewish.
Yes.
But the material we're reading insists that in this specific moment, those Jewish disciples, they weren't standing there representing the nation of Israel.
No.
They were standing there as placeholders, as the initial representatives of all future believers.
Because the blueprint was always designed to scale up.
Scale up, exactly.
The material points to the very end of Matthew's Gospel, chapter 28, commonly known as the Great Commission. The mandate suddenly shifts from a localized, culturally specific group to a global directive.
Yeah, go and disciple the nations.
Right. The Gentiles are brought into the fold.
Which is wild when you think about it. It takes this highly exclusive, intense, rabbinic model of a master and an apprentice and suddenly says, okay, apply this to the entire globe.
Right.
The inner circle is no longer defined by your ethnicity or your background or where you live. It's defined purely by your willingness to step out of the crowd and enter the incubator.
Which means the mechanics of discipleship are universally applicable. Anyone from any nation can theoretically step into the inner circle. But
And there's a big but here.
a huge but. While the invitation is universal, the demands of the incubator remain incredibly exclusive and just punishing.
Let's talk about those demands.
Yes.
Because stepping out of the crowd isn't just about walking 10 feet closer to the speaker so you can hear them better.
No, it's not.
The material lays out two very specific, highly demanding mechanics for what it actually means to be a disciple.
Mm.
The first mechanic is following, and the second is learning.
And we should look at following first because it's the trigger for the entire process. The material anchors this in Mark 1:15, and it ties following directly to the concept of repentance because, as the text says, the kingdom of God has drawn near.
Now, when I hear the word repentance, my modern brain immediately pictures like someone crying, feeling incredibly guilty because they did something bad and promising never to do it again.
Yeah, feeling sorry.
Right. It feels very tied to that ladder of morality we talked about earlier.
And that is exactly how Western culture has largely inherited the concept. But in the original Greek context of these manuscripts, the word used is metanoia.
Metanoia.
Yes. It doesn't primarily mean sorrow or guilt. Metanoia literally translates to a complete change of mind, a paradigm shift. It is a total structural reversal of direction.
A directional shift. Wow. That makes perfect sense when you look at the example the material uses to illustrate this. It points to the story of Matthew, the tax collector, in chapter 9. It's this very brief, almost shockingly abrupt scene.
It really is.
Jesus is walking by, sees Matthew sitting at his tax office, and simply says, "Follow me." And the text just says, and he rose and followed him.
No hesitation.
None. But we need to pause and think about the psychology of that moment. A tax collector in the first century Roman occupation wasn't just like a guy doing spreadsheets.
No, they were contractors for the occupying empire.
Exactly. Extracting money from their own people. They were wealthy, they were deeply entrenched in the economic machinery of the city, and they were socially despised.
Pariahs, basically.
Total pariahs. Yeah. Matthew is sitting at the literal seat of his livelihood. His ledgers, his money, his entire identity is on that table. And upon a two-word command, he completely severs that physical tie.
And that physical severance is the manifestation of metanoia. He didn't just feel bad about overcharging someone, he abandoned the entire system. Following requires an initial, radical detachment from the inertia of the outer circle.
The inertia of the crowd.
Yeah. The crowd operates on the momentum of normal human life, careers, social standing, financial security. Following is the act of stepping off that moving walkway.
But dropping your career and walking away, that's only the first part. I mean, you can physically follow someone, you can walk 3 paces behind them down a dirt road and still be completely unengaged mentally.
Oh, absolutely.
Your mind could be a million miles away, regretting leaving your tax booth.
Thinking about all the money you left on the table.
Exactly. And that brings us to the second pillar, which the material argues is far more difficult. Learning.
The transition from following to learning is where the true crucible begins. The material anchors this phase in Matthew 11:29, a very famous verse. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me.
Right.
And the author of our study text makes a stark, unambiguous claim right here. They write that while discipline is required to follow, we especially need discipline in order to learn of Christ.
I really want to dig into this metaphor of the yoke, because this is where the reality of this theology gets incredibly visceral. A yoke is not a leash.
No.
It's not a collar. It is a massive, heavy, often splintering agricultural tool.
Yeah, it's brutal.
It's a wooden beam carved to fit over the necks of 2 animals, usually oxen, to lock them together so they can pull a heavy plow through hard dirt. And when farmers yoke animals, they don't just put 2 young wild oxen together.
They'd never get anything done.
They just fight each other. They pair a massive veteran ox, an animal that knows the exact pace, the exact cadence, the exact path, with a young, stubborn, untrained ox.
Right.
And if you are that young ox, taking on the yoke means you are violently stripped of your autonomy. If you try to run ahead, the heavy wood chokes you. If you get tired and try to drag your feet, the veteran ox just keeps walking relentlessly, and the wood chafes and drags you forward anyway.
Yeah.
You are forced into a total submission to their pace.
And the visceral nature of that metaphor is exactly the point.
Yeah.
Taking the yoke implies a massive, continuous, agonizing submission of personal will.
Yeah.
Following, leaving the tax booth, might be triggered by an initial burst of adrenaline, a moment of profound, overwhelming conviction. It takes immense courage, yes, but it is an event.
Right. It happens once.
Exactly. Learning under the yoke is a grueling, unglamorous, sustained process of having your internal operating system rewired.
It really is the difference between enlisting in the military and surviving boot camp.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. Enlisting is the following phase. You feel a surge of patriotism or purpose, you sign the paper, you get on the bus. That's a huge physical shift.
Yeah.
But boot camp is the yoke.
That's where the real work happens.
Boot camp is where you learn that you don't get to sleep when you're tired. You don't get to eat what you want. You don't get to react when someone screams in your face. Every single natural instinct you have is systematically broken down and replaced with the instincts of a soldier.
Right.
If following is moving your feet, learning is the complete psychological and spiritual overriding of the self.
Which perfectly explains why the author insists that discipline is especially required to learn. You are fighting your own nature every single second you are in that yoke.
Yeah.
And this intense focus on discipline isn't just for the sake of asceticism.
Asceticism meaning just suffering for the sake of suffering, like denying yourself pleasure just to prove you can.
Precisely. Or rather, not exactly that, but close. Asceticism is often about punishing the body to elevate the mind.
Right.
But this framework isn't interested in just punishing the human for the sake of it. The discipline, the yoke, the boot camp, it is all a highly calibrated mechanism designed for a very specific destination.
And that destination is a radical paradigm shift in the very nature of the person.
A completely different state of being.
Which brings us to what I consider the core mission statement of this entire theological excerpt. I want to read this directly from the source because the language is so absolute. It says, "We are being discipled from being a natural man to being a God man, living the divine life by denying our natural life."
Wow.
Just let that sink in for a second. A God man.
It dismantles the ladder of morality entirely. The goal of this discipline is not to produce a highly enlightened human.
No.
It is not to produce a perfectly moral citizen who never breaks a law. It is aiming for a new species. The natural man is the starting point, but it is not the foundation to be built upon. It is the thing to be replaced.
The mechanism stated here is living the divine life by denying the natural life. It sets up a fundamental, uncompromising duality.
Yes, very dualistic.
You have the natural life. That's the person you are by birth, your natural intelligence, your humor, your emotional reactions, your earthly personality. And then you have the divine life. And this text treats them as a zero-sum game. One cannot thrive unless the other is actively suffocated.
To illustrate how this operates in practice, the author actually brings in a modern scenario from their own environment. They discuss young people who have come to a full-time training, which is essentially a modern incubator.
Right.
And the author points out a critical distinction. These trainees are not there to be educated in human understanding. They are there to be discipled in divine understanding.
Okay, stop right there.
Yeah.
Because this is where my human logic starts flashing warning lights.
I don't blame you.
The author is telling these young people to reject human understanding.
Mm.
But I am sitting here right now, and you listening are sitting there using our frontal lobes, our linguistic comprehension, our human logic to process these very words. Is this theology demanding a complete rejection of the intellect? Are they asking people to become mindless drones? How can you learn anything if you're supposed to deny the very human understanding that allows you to learn?
It's the natural friction point, and it's a vital question. If we follow the internal logic of the material, it is not advocating for a lobotomy or anti-intellectualism.
Okay.
The brain is the hardware. The issue is the software.
So it's like my brain is running on Mac OS, but this theology is asking me to run a Windows program.
Yes.
The physical computer is fine, but the operating system is completely incompatible.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. Let's take that OS analogy further. The human understanding is the default factory-installed operating system of the natural man.
Right.
And it is a very sophisticated system. It's driven by self-preservation, logical deduction based on earthly variables, human empathy, personal ambition. It functions perfectly well for navigating the physical world and climbing that ladder of morality. However, this framework argues that this default OS cannot process the code of the divine life. They are entirely different programming languages.
So the divine understanding is a brand new operating system that has to be downloaded and installed.
Yes. But you can't run both operating systems simultaneously.
They conflict.
If you try, the system crashes. The default human OS will always prioritize itself. If the divine OS says, give away everything you have, the human OS will immediately throw an error code.
Right. Citing self-preservation and financial logic.
Exactly. Therefore, the discipline of the yoke, the daily agonizing boot camp, is the process of actively overriding or denying the default OS so the divine OS can take full control of the hardware.
Man, that makes the author's next admission incredibly poignant and honestly a bit intimidating.
It really is.
After talking about training these young people, the author, who is clearly in a position of high authority, writes, "While I am helping them to be discipled, I am also being discipled day by day in many aspects to live the divine life by denying my natural life." Even the teacher is still in boot camp.
Which proves that this OS upgrade is not a one-time event.
Right.
You don't just walk down an aisle, have an emotional moment, and suddenly become a god-man permanently. It's a relentless daily battle.
Mm-hmm.
The natural life, the old OS, is always running in the background, constantly trying to reboot and reassert dominance. The author's humility here underscores that the denial of the self is a perpetual state of being.
But this raises a massive logistical question. How do you know what the new operating system is supposed to look like when it's running correctly?
Right. What's the benchmark?
Exactly. If the goal is this unprecedented state of being a godman, how do you even know if you're doing it right? If it's totally alien to human understanding, what is the metric?
Well, the material anticipates this problem and points directly to the ultimate prototype, the original blueprint.
It points to Christ.
Uh-huh.
But it describes him in a way that is vastly different from how he is typically portrayed in mainstream culture.
Very different.
Usually when people think of Christ, they think of a savior, someone who performs miracles, teaches moral lessons, and forgives sins. But this text treats him as a prototype, the very first of a brand new species.
It makes a sweeping historical claim. Prior to his incarnation, meaning his birth as a human, there had never been such a man in human history.
Right.
He is posited as the first God-man.
Huh.
And the defining characteristic of his life, the thing that makes him the prototype, is not the miracles.
Right. The text says the defining characteristic is that he did not live his human life. He lived the divine life by actively denying his human life.
And the material provides mechanical evidence for this from the Gospel of John. It quotes Jesus saying that whatever he spoke was not his own word, but the word of the Father who sent him. It highlights John chapter 5, emphasizing that he did nothing out of himself.
The phrase used is staggering. It says, he did everything out of and by the sending Father. He was not the sender, but the sent one. He did not live himself. Instead, he lived the sender. Think about what it means to do nothing out of yourself. I mean, we made 10,000 micro decisions a day based on our own desires.
Oh, easily. What to eat, what to watch.
What to say, how to react to an insult. The material is painting a picture of a human existence that is perfectly, voluntarily hollowed out.
Hollowed out is the perfect phrase.
It's like a beautifully crafted silver flute. A flute is a masterpiece of engineering, but it has absolutely no internal mechanism for creating sound.
Right.
It cannot play its own music. If it sits on a table, it's just silent. Its entire purpose for existing is to perfectly channel the breath, the intent, and the emotion of the musician holding it.
That is exactly it.
This text is saying that the prototype, the first God-man, was a flawless human flute, playing only the breath of the sender.
The flute analogy captures the total negation of self perfectly. He didn't just agree with the sender. He didn't just consult the sender for advice before acting.
Like, hey, should I do this?
Right, no. The text boldly claims he lived the sender. The human hardware was flawlessly operated by the divine software without a single glitch of natural self-interest.
But wait, if Christ is the prototype, the absolute standard, doesn't that make this entire endeavor impossible?
How so?
The text says he did nothing out of himself. If I try to do that, if I try to perfectly deny my own will and only act on divine impulse, I am going to fail before I even finish making my morning coffee.
Oh, absolutely.
I'll get annoyed at the toaster, and boom, my human OS is back in charge.
The toaster always gets you.
Always. How does this theological framework expect a reader born with a natural OS to mimic a prototype that was inherently divine from conception?
You are hitting on the exact reason why the incubator was necessary.
Okay, walk me through that.
Look at how the material describes the formation of the inner circle. It says, the Lord called some to follow him just to see how he lived so that he could show them the pattern of a God-man. For 3.5 years they saw and were discipled by this pattern.
Oh. So the 3.5 years of walking around Judea wasn't just about preaching to the crowds.
No.
It was a 42-month intensive masterclass for the inner circle, just to observe the prototype in action.
Exactly. They had to watch how the divine OS operates within a human frame.
Wow.
But to address your very real concern about it being an impossible standard, the underlying assumption of this entire framework is that you are not expected to mimic this pattern using your natural life.
Wait, really?
Yes. Remember, the natural life is the thing that must be denied. The flute cannot blow air into itself.
Right.
The theology implies that the exact same divine life that animated the prototype is imparted, breathed into the believer.
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay. So it moves from me trying to act like a God-man, which is just behavioral modification again, right?
Exactly, the moral ladder.
Right. It moves away from that to a kind of spiritual replication.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to pretend to be the flute playing music. I'm receiving the breath of the musician.
Yes, you cannot replicate a God-man using a natural man's operating system.
Makes sense.
The 3.5 years were about the disciples studying the pattern so that later, when they received that divine life themselves, they would recognize how it was supposed to function within them. They would know what it feels like to let the sender play the notes.
That makes sense of the historical disciples, but I mean, Peter and John and Matthew are long gone.
Very gone.
Observing the historical prototype isn't a physical option for people living today. Which brings us to the final, and frankly the most confrontational section of our deep dive.
Here we go.
The material transitions from the historical observation on the dusty roads of first-century Judea to the present day. It introduces the modern equivalent of that 3.5-year incubator.
The author writes, "In the church life, we are also being discipled by the Lord. The church life is a discipling life to disciple us from being a natural man to being a God-man."
This redefines the entire concept of church.
Completely.
In this specific framework, the church is not a social club. It's not a community center. It is not merely a place you go on Sunday to sing songs and feel better about your week.
No, it's the crucible.
It is the active, modern continuation of the Inner Circle's incubator.
And it is within the context of this modern crucible that the material drops what might be the most radical claim we've seen yet.
Yeah, brace yourselves for this one.
It reads, "God does not care whether you are a good man or a bad man, because everything of your natural man, good or bad, must go to the cross."
We need to unpack the profound psychological weight of that statement. It completely annihilates the ladder of morality we discussed in the beginning.
It levels the entire playing field of human achievement.
I really want to sit with this.
Yeah.
Because God does not care whether you are a good man or a bad man. It goes against every fiber of our societal conditions.
Well, it's completely offensive to human logic.
It really is.
Yeah.
Imagine a massive plot of land. On the left side of the property, you have this beautifully built, meticulously crafted 3-story wooden mansion. It has wraparound porches, polished mahogany floors, stained glass windows. This mansion represents the good man. This is the person who is naturally empathetic, who gives half their income to charity, who never raises their voice in anger, who is a pillar of the community.
A great person.
The best person. And on the right side of the property, you have a collapsing, rotting, termite-infested wooden shack.
Yikes.
The roof is caved in, it smells terrible, it's a hazard to even walk near. This represents the bad man, the selfish person, the person who hurts others, the person whose life is just a chaotic mess.
Right.
Every traditional moral system, every civic philosophy looks at that property and says, our goal is to fix the shack and make it look like the mansion.
Obviously.
Remodel it. But this theological text is saying that the ultimate architect is pulling up to the property with a bulldozer, and he is going to utterly level both the shack and the mansion.
Both of them.
Why? Because he only wants to build with steel. Is the text genuinely suggesting that human morality, the beautiful wooden mansion, is completely worthless?
Your analogy captures the uncompromising brutality of this theology flawlessly.
It's just wild to wrap your head around.
Yes. Within this framework, the wooden mansion and the wooden shack share the exact same fatal flaw. They are both made of wood.
Wow.
They are both products of the natural man. They are both running on the human operating system. In fact, the text suggests something even more unsettling. The mansion is actually more dangerous than the shack.
Wait, really? How can being a genuinely kind, patient person be dangerous?
Think about the person living in the collapsing shack. The bad man is usually acutely aware of his brokenness.
Yeah, that's true.
When the rain comes in through the roof, he knows he needs a new house. He knows he needs saving.
Right.
But the person living in the beautiful wooden mansion, they are deeply comfortable, their natural goodness, their philanthropy, their patience, it tricks them into thinking they're already aligned with the divine.
Oh, wow.
They think their human OS is functioning perfectly, so why would they ever submit to the agonizing yoke of downloading a new one?
They wouldn't.
They rely entirely on themselves, not on the sender. Therefore, their goodness becomes the ultimate barrier. It prevents them from ever realizing they are meant to be a different species entirely.
Wow. Their very success at climbing the ladder of morality is the thing that blinds them to the fact that they're on the wrong ladder entirely.
Exactly.
Well, the cross in this context is the bulldozer. The text says, all the natural persons should be discipled to the cross because we have another person in us.
Exactly. The cross here is not just viewed historically, as a singular event of atonement where sins were wiped away.
Right, a past event.
It is presented as an ongoing psychological and spiritual demolition site. Its purpose is the execution of the natural self, both the parts we hate and the parts we are incredibly proud of.
Hmm.
It clears the site entirely so that the steel building, the other person in us, the divine life, can take over the space without competition.
Man, this has been an incredibly intense, staggering journey through this material. Let's take a breath and recap the massive architectural blueprint we've just explored.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. We started by defining the boundaries of the inner circle. We saw that stepping out of the anonymous crowds requires immense, grueling discipline.
The incubator.
Right. It requires taking on the heavy wooden yoke of an apprentice, committing not just to follow physically, but to learn, to submit to the agonizing process of overriding our default human operating system.
And we explored how the ultimate destination of this discipline is not moral improvement, but an ontological shift, a transition from a purely natural man to a hybrid God-man.
A completely new species.
Yes. We saw how the historical life of Christ serves as the absolute prototype, demonstrating what it looks like when a human life is perfectly hollowed out of self-interest to live solely by the breath of the sender.
Just like the flute.
Just like the flute.
And finally, we arrived at the modern crucible, the church life, where we confronted the reality of the cross as the great equalizer. The ultimate demolition site where every natural trait we possess, our most shameful flaws and our most beautiful, polished human virtues, must be bulldozed to make room for the divine life.
Everything made of wood has to go.
Everything.
It is a framework that demands absolute, uncompromising surrender, but in return, it promises a transformation so profound it redefines the nature of the individual.
Which brings me to a lingering, perhaps slightly terrifying question for you, the listener, as you step away from this deep dive today. We have spent this entire time unpacking a blueprint that demands the complete and total denial of the natural self. It asks you to send every human trait you have, your humor, your natural kindness, your ambitions, along with your flaws, to the cross, so that a divine person can completely take over the hardware of your life.
Right.
But if that is the ultimate destination, what happens to your unique individuality?
That is the million-dollar question.
Does this theology of the God-man imply the complete erasure of who you uniquely are? Are we all just destined to be identical, hollowed-out silver flutes, stripped of all personality, playing the exact same single note? Or does it suggest a paradox even deeper? That your true ultimate identity, the unique self you were actually designed to be from the beginning, can only be fully unlocked when the natural you finally gets entirely out of the way.
That's something to think about.
It really is. We want to thank you for joining us on this intense intellectual and spiritual exploration into the architecture of the God-man. Until next time, keep diving deep.